Hi everyone, my name is Paul Tilley and I'm the instructor for the Atlantic Trades Business Certificate Program. Today we're talking about allocating human resources, the first module in TB1030. So come along with us and let's review the content in the module.
One of the things that we find in organizations is when they're small, they're what I call loosey-goosey. They're not really well set up. Now, the problem with that is nobody knows who's in control. Do you know who your boss is? Do you know who's your equivalent person? Do you know who you report to? Do you know who you ask questions to? Do you know who you complain to? Do you know who can tell you what to do and who can't tell you what to do? These sorts of things are questions that you would have if you work in an organization that does not have what's called an organizational structure. As organizations get bigger, they have to get more formalized. They have to get more formalized because everybody's going to be confused otherwise. You know, you can say, well, it gets stiffened up as an organization gets bigger, but that's the way that it works because otherwise it becomes a confusing mess. So many small businesses start off without any structure whatsoever. As they grow, they have to bring in some form of structure, which in itself can be a bit of a challenge for a lot of organizations. Seeing that, I'll say you are the owner of the business or you are the boss, you're the one who has to set up this structure. And you do it for your own health and wellness as much as anything else, because that way you can say, you're responsible for this, you're responsible for that, I'm responsible for something else. Everybody knows what their responsibility is and is accountable for getting that job done. Otherwise, it's I thought you were doing that problem. So as growth comes to a business, these problems get worse. You know, businesses will inevitably need to spread operational responsibilities across more people. One person cannot work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a long period of time to run a business. It will wear you down. It will wear you down. So you need to be able to, if you're the owner of the business, you need to be able to say to someone, could you help me? And here's what I want you to do. Okay? So determining really who does what and how information is distributed or disseminated through the organization is really important because, again, anarchy will prevail unless you put in some sort of a system. The other thing is you need accountability in an organization. I have a job to do, and I have to be measured on whether or not I did it. Otherwise, you don't know I've done a good job. You don't know I've done a poor job. There's no measure. So at least with a measure, you can guarantee that, yeah, I'm doing it right, or no, I'm not doing it right. So this ordering system is called an organizational structure. That's the broad category for it. Putting some sort of a framework on the organization in order to make it work. And normally these things are like a pyramid, hence the word hierarchy. They have someone at the top, and as we roll down, there are more and more people down below it. So it has this kind of a pyramid type shape. So here it is, for example, a typical organizational structure that we have. Here we have a small organization that has the boss, the CEO. We have an advisory board. That's just a bunch of people. We have a person, Russell. We have another person, David. What does Russell do? Russell is a staff director. In other words, he's responsible for staff. What does David do? He's a director for volunteers, so he organizes the volunteers. So realistically, if we look at this organization, the people that work for it all report to Russell. So let's look at the people who work for it. Bent, Debbie, Bridget, Mickey, and Percy all report to Russell. We can clearly see that in this organizational structure. Now, all it is really is a stack of people organized with these lines. This is called a reporting structure. In other words, Bent knows who his boss is or his supervisor. Debbie knows who the supervisor is. Russell knows that he is responsible for Bent and that he is responsible for Mickey. It's clear. Everybody knows what everyone's role is. It does that. The other thing, it creates what's called a hierarchy. In other words, someone's up above and someone's down below. The workers tend to be on the bottom end. They report up to the management, and the top management is right here. Now, good, bad, or indifferent, we can say, well, top management information doesn't flow. It's really hard to get to see the CEO because the CEO is so busy, or CEO don't know my name, or these sorts of things. That results as organizations get bigger and bigger and bigger. But for this type of organization, certainly we've only got a half dozen people. They all know one another, but they all know one another's role and who they're responsible to and for. So this ordering is what's called an organizational structure. And no matter how big your organization is, if you got more than one employee, if it's just yourself, obviously the structure consists of one person. But if you got more than, there needs to be some form of an organizational structure for the business's sake and the people who work in its sake, because they know who they report to. If I'm down on the lower end, down here, and the board comes and tells me to do something, and David comes and tells me to do something, and Russell I don't know who I'm responsible to. I'll be trying, I got too many masters, and there's a basic rule in management that one person, you have one boss. You cannot have two bosses, one boss. So the way that this system is set up is that it ensures that people have one boss. So in the case here, Erica is the head of the organization. We can see that this is the top of the pyramid. We also see that Russell reports to Erica. We can see this line here. Russell reports to Erica and is Bent's immediate supervisor. Why is that? Because there is a line that goes down to Bent. And Bent is in charge of the finances. It says he's the finance director. He's responsible for finances. He might have a dozen people under him. But again, he clearly knows what his role is, as does Debbie, communications director, as does Bridget, fundraising director, as does Mickey, program director, as does Percy, operations director. Now, sometimes there will be some overlap, but it's clear roles and responsibilities are laid out using this organizational structure, and that helps organizations manage people, and that clarifies what people's roles are. It clarifies communications. You know who you got to talk to. Who's your boss? It indicates who's responsible for what. Okay, director of marketing is responsible for marketing. Director of finance, responsible for finance. Very clear. It provides a clear definition of the roles and responsibilities of everyone in the hierarchy. Creates clear understanding of what's expected of everyone, you particularly, and defines a clear chain of command. Now, having reflected on that in your work experience out there, now this is a rhetorical question, but can you relate to this in your workplace? And, I think particularly, Justin, in terms of the unionized environment, does it work? It might have problems, no doubt, but you know who your boss is, and you know who you are supervising. Does that make life easier for you? Because of that, it should. That's the theory. It's supposed to be able to make your life easier because you know where you fit in the organization. You have a defined role. So all organizations should have an organizational structure. Something like IOC would have a very big structure. Something like your little plumbing company, not a very big structure. It also shows employees how to advance their career. Look, if I am in this company and I say, well, one of these days, if I do really well, I'm going to become the staff director. I can clearly see how I'm going to advance, because once you're in your job for so long, you're naturally going to say, I want to do something bigger, better, another challenge. So you can clearly see what opportunities exist when you have a clear organizational structure. And it clearly allows for functionality. If someone is calling from outside the organization, the director of marketing is probably a better person to talk to than the director of operations. Operations tends to be internal. Marketing tends to be more externally focused. The trail of responsibility is there. Who's responsible? If something goes right, who gets the credit? If something goes wrong, who gets the blame? That's important, as opposed to tarring everybody or praising everybody. There has to be a way to define who did what. It also helps determine which staff will participate in the decision making. You know, if we look at the organization here, obviously the person at the top is going to make the ultimate decision, but these people are going to weigh into that. And they have the relative skills in the various areas to provide good advice. So you would get a better decision making under a good, clear organizational structure. So, okay, if we see the value, if I can demonstrate to you the value of the organizational structure, what kind of organizational structures exist? Well, realistically, there's two, but the two have little offshoots, so there's four, okay? But if we think about organizational structures, the basic two is a functional structure or a divisional structure, depending on the organization. And you know this already. This is not rocket science, okay? If you think about your organization, and I know IOC is set up this way as a functional structure. All of the people, here's the manager. The manager has different departments. You know, okay, we got welders, machinists, and designers, let's say, for example. That's the various departments. That's what's called a functional structure because they're broken down by their function. This is what we do. This is what they do. This is what the other folks do. And these people have common issues. The welders, for example, might need a new welding machine. Or the machinist might need a new lathe. Or the designers might need more computers. But these things, these common elements coupled together certainly help in terms of getting a business organized. And support people, such as the executive assistant, is not in the direct line of the chain of order, right? So Fred Arnott, for example, manages these three departments, and the executive assistant provides support. So it gives a clear reporting relationship too, which is perfect because you know who your boss is and they know what you do. We also have a second type of structure called the divisional structure. And all the divisional structure is usually it's an organization that has more than one geographic part, okay? If we think about a company, for example, like a plumbing company, you might have commercial customers and you might have residential customers. Now, if you're working at a plumbing company, it doesn't take you long to realize that there are different needs, demands, tools, timelines, importance to those two sets of customers. A residential got a toilet stuffed up. A commercial could be something like the health science center where, you know, things are going to go bad fast unless we get it fixed for a whole bunch of people. And like, for example, we got industrial mechanics here. Well, an industrial mechanic is different. For example, Evan, you're dealing with automotive, whereas Justin is up there thinking about ball mills and things like that. You know, very different, but bigger wrenches, bigger tools, bigger machines. Again, different specialties. Plumbing, steam pipe fitting. You know, pipe fitting is high-end plumbing. But you know it is a very different trade. So using a divisional structure allows us to group people with common trades or common skill sets together. So for example, the commercial division versus a residential division. So these create what's called child companies. They're like independent, two little independent business. Okay, here's the commercial division of my company. That could be an independent business in and of itself. And here is the residential division. It could be an independent company in and of itself. It's more or less geared up for the customer more than anything else. We could also have, like, you know, different divisions that would solve different projects. Like if you're dealt with the oil industry, you could have a division that deals with the Hibernia platform, a division that deals with the Hebron platform, and a division that deals with Terra Nova. Now, kind of one that everybody hates, but you know, in business they love it. Some of the larger companies like it. Is a combination of the first two, which is really taking the benefits of a functional structure and hooking it with the benefits of a divisional structure. So what we have here in this thing called a matrix structure is we have the various divisions. So for example, the Hibernia, the Hebron, and the White Rose group. And we've got the trades, which we saw in the functional structure. So for example, in the Hibernia project, we have welders, machinists, and designers. As we get bigger and bigger and bigger, we can imagine this type of thing. If you got a divisional structure, within the divisions, you could have substructures for welders, machinists, and designers. This one tends to only work for very large businesses with lots of people. And it can cause some problems because you could theoretically have two bosses, which breaks this basic rule of business where you only have one boss. But very large companies tend to be set up this way. The latest thing, or I won't call it the latest thing, it was a popular thing back in the 2000s, was this idea of a flat structure. And a flat structure works really good, for example, in the IT industry where everything is kind of, you know, loosey-goosey. It doesn't work so well in the trade business. But effectively, a flat structure means that everybody's on the same level. We don't have a very clear definition of what your role in the organization is. So it might work for a small organization, very informal, that type of thing, but it wouldn't work as the organization gets bigger. So the good thing is everybody can talk to one another. There's no this, you got to talk to this person or you got to talk to that person. Everybody is all an open door policy. It's a nice, friendly type of business. But again, it gets rid of levels, but it also gets rid of the advantages of common people working together. It can lead to uncertainty of who reports to whom, and it can often create some power struggles. So you got to be very careful with this type of structure. But as I say, just in summary, you know, there's really only two structures. You either set your business up by the function or you set your business up by the division. Functional is the most common. As an organization gets bigger, it can get divisions, meaning that it can have little sub-companies. If it gets really big, maybe a matrix type structure, which has different companies that have functional structures within them. I have this little video here that just kind of reinforces the point. I just wanted to show you this. It's only 3 minutes.
Organizational structure. Businesses can be very complex organizations with many hundreds or thousands of people working in them in many different roles. In order to manage their resources effectively, businesses must have clear organizational structures in place. Organizational structures include the different relationships between people in an organization. For example, in some cases, an employer might want to have a formal relationship between people in the organization, or in others, it might be more relaxed. This happens in everyday life too. Think about any organization that you're a part of. Do you call the other people by their first names? Do you call them by their title? What about the other members themselves? Do they call each other Mrs. D, Dr. X, or Mr. M? Or do they refer to each other by their first names? How do they refer to the person leading the organization? Different levels in a business are referred to as hierarchies. A hierarchy occurs where people are given some sort of title or rank that signifies their importance in the organization. All businesses have employees working at different levels of responsibility. At the bottom, a business depends on its operatives to produce the products or services. Team leaders often perform the day-to-day management role, with operational managers setting direction and strategy for the business as a whole. The number of employees in each level will depend on the business's organizational structure. It is important to determine who takes responsibility for decision-making, who reports to who, and who to blame when things mess up, or who gets the pat on the back if things go well. There are three typical organizational structures. They are known as hierarchical, flat, and matrix. A hierarchical structure is typical in large companies, where each level of employee reports upwards, and each level has a narrow span of control. The downside of this type of structure is that it can often lead to significantly slower communication and decision-making. A flat organizational structure has much less levels of hierarchy and wider spans of control. This means employees at each level can communicate with managers more easily and quickly. However, this usually means that workers take more responsibility for decision making. The benefits of this are that it may encourage a more dedicated and motivated workforce. Typically, this type of structure is used in small businesses and startups. A benefit of this structure is that it allows the business to change rapidly to respond to the market, customer, or competitors. However, this only applies if the staff are well trained and are actually capable of making the changes. Lastly, a matrix structure gathers employees who hold the relevant expertise in order to help the business to meet its goals. The people selected come from different levels and departments within the business. The structure can be used in both hierarchical and flat organizations and are typically used for specific projects. Individual team members may come from different parts of the business, regardless of their usual location in the hierarchy. Obviously, once a project is over, the matrix will be disbanded.
Yeah, usually it's temporary. Okay, so that kind of gives a quick overview of this idea of organizational structure. Well, why do we bother with this? There's no real best organizational structure. Really, every organization has to think about its own setup and work accordingly. But we got to ask some basic questions in order to help figure out what kind of structure works best. You know, ask like, how's the job divided amongst your employees? If you're a business, every single one, if you think about your business now and you think about how the business divides up the employees, you know, you're all going to get a different response because your businesses are all different. They're different sizes, different people, different sets of skills. So if you got a group that's too broad, it won't work. If you got a group that's too specialized, it won't work. So you really need to think about this in terms of figuring out what the structure will work best. Your departments, if you got a group of people that's really, really big, for example, you got 15 machinists in your workplace and you got 2 welders. Usually you'd have one person being responsible for that group. Can you manage 15 people? That's what's called this span of control. You know, can one person be responsible for 15 people? Is that too many? It might not be. Depends on the organization. But as the business grows, you got to think about those departments. Will those departments all be the same size? You might want to think about changing your structure as you move along if, for example, the business gets larger. How many people can one person manage? Depends on the job. You know, if you got people like you're all tradespeople, you know your job. You don't need a lot of people looking over your shoulder telling you what to do. You know your job. But in other jobs where you don't have skilled people, they might need more control. They might need more people looking over them and tell them what to do. It really depends on your workers, right? And so again, depending on the type of job, how many persons can one manage? Could be a lot, could be a very few. And how many layers do you want? We all know that as you add layers, the organization gets very, very difficult to communicate. How do you talk to the boss when the boss is 16 layers up? You know, that's a real problem. So you might want to make sure that you think, we don't need so many layers that communication gets restricted because of that. So let's just build an organizational structure just to kind of put a point on how to do this. You know, this is not overly complicated when you think about it, but I'm assuming that this is probably the first time you've seen this. So consider that we're looking at a small shop, okay? In addition to the owner, Charlie, we have 5 employees. Here's a summary of the employees. So if you think about the employees, there's John. John's an apprentice machinist, just 1 year at a school. Paul, apprentice again, 1 year at a school, but he needs some guidance. Paul is not that, not that trustworthy, or sometimes just doesn't do it right, not sure. George is a journeyman machinist. He got 20 years experience, and he's got management experience. Mick, apprentice, or Mike, I should say, but I wanted to say Mick, apprentice carpenter, just out of school. Keith, journeyman carpenter, 25 years of experience. So we ask ourselves, okay, these are the people in our organization. How should we organize it? So what do you think? You know, what type of organization would work well here? Well, we've got two distinct groups, don't we? We've got the machinist group and we've got the carpenter group. So if we look at this, if we said, okay, so let's, I got to take it down here in order to use this. Okay, so if we took Charlie and we put Charlie up here, Charlie's the boss. And we said, okay, there's the machinist group and the carpentry group. Okay, so this is very much a divisional type of thing. So we'll just go back here and we'll say, okay, look, there is, in terms of machinists, there's 2 apprentices and there's 1 journeyman machinist. Who would be the best person to manage that group? Who would be the best person? Well, we'll look at it. George has management experience and he's got 20 years of experience. I think if I were a betting man, I'd say that George is probably the best one to be responsible for the 2 underlings. These 2 are apprentices. They might need some guidance and help. The best person to provide that would be George. So again, to put names to these things, we have, if we put George as the apprentice machinist or the journeyman, I'll call him a JM. And then we say, okay, under George at the same level as George, below George, we are going to put the other 2. So John and Paul will fit down here. Now, in order to clearly define what the reporting structure is, what we do is we just put arrows. We connect them like here. No different than this. Okay. And in this case, George would be reporting to Charlie. Charlie owns the company. So that would be, so Paul and John then would effectively, George would be their supervisor and George would report to Charlie. Now for the carpentry group here below, the carpenter group, there's Mick and Keith. Now there's 2 of them. The question is, who should be the lead? Well, the apprentice carpenter or the journeyman. Well, the journeyman has a lot more experience and probably Keith could learn from Mick. So if we had Keith here in this case and Mick. And again, this would be the setup for this. And so this could be an example of an organizational chart for this organization. Mick is below Keith. Keith is responsible for Mick. And George is responsible for 2 people. Now, the other thing that this organizational chart might help us with is pay. George is responsible for 2 people. Keith is only responsible for 1. George should probably get paid more. So it would help indicate in terms of an assessment of compensation. And all of them will report to Charlie. So these are how organizational charts work. Now, I put their names in here for the purpose of this, but normally we put people's job titles as opposed to names. But for small organizations, names work good. Does everyone see that? The general concept of how this organizational chart thing works and the value of it? Any questions on it? What I've done is I'm going to ask you guys in the discussion activity 1, the very first one, consider the organizational structures that we've talked about and develop an organizational structure for your business. So I want you to think about a business. It could be where you work. It could be a business that's in your own mind. Okay? Like I just did there then in that example, what would be the organizational structure that you would put in place? So all I need is a little paragraph on it, and you could draw an organizational structure. One of the things that I found useful, by the way, in doing this, you know, when in order to do this, what I like to do, see, I'm asking you to draw stuff as well. I get a pad of paper, I write it down, you know, I draw it out. I take a picture of that with my phone, and I take the picture and I put it into the discussion. Simple, dimple, right? No technology other than put the picture in. But if you can do that, that would be an easy way to do that discussion. Okay? So I want you guys to think about that.
Quick question for you. Would the picture suffice as your answer, or would you like a?
You can
So
write
you
it all
don't
out on
need
the paper. As long as I can read it, I'm good. Okay.
Okay, but that's what I'm asking. So, would there be a paragraph attached to this picture, or let's say similar to what you just did?
Yep, you could write it on the piece of paper, right? So I just put it all on one sheet of paper. Your answer, what you wrote, the drawing, take a picture of it, and voila. Simple as that. Okay, so that's that first section. The second part of this, which is only a few minutes, I'm getting close here now. Management roles and responsibilities. So here you are now. We've talked about this organizational structure, and you say to yourself, okay, what is it that I have to do as a manager? What are some of the tasks that I need to do? Well, if we're thinking about a small business and a start, you know, and I know, Harrison, for example, in your business, you know, someone who starts the business is really what we call an entrepreneur. And I have entrepreneurs here tonight. You guys are entrepreneurs. You started your own business. Several of you have started your own business. That means you're really idea people, okay? You're idea people. You have a great idea for a business, and you're thinking, wow, gee willikers, here I go. So an entrepreneur is you're starting off, and you're really chief cook and bottle washer for everything you do, right? You're the idea person. You're the business planner. You're the human resource specialist, because your employee is you, and you might have an argument with yourself over what you should do. So you're responsible for this, and if you got employees, you're responsible for those as well. You're the marketer for the business. You get to sell the product, whatever you're selling, or the service. You have to figure out how to do that. You're the bookkeeper, accountant. You have to figure out how to keep track of the money in your business. And you're the customer service person, because you are the business. I mean, really, it's you. So there you are, an entrepreneur. You've started your business, and look at all these hats you're wearing. Okay? You're responsible for the ideas. You're responsible for the business plan. You're responsible for all the people that work for you. You're the human resource person. You're the marketer. You get them to sell your product abroad and find out what people want from you. You're the bookkeeper, accountant. You're the customer service person. Man, that's a lot of roles. So you're stressed. You are stressed. You are a small business person, and your business is growing. The stress level is going up every time it grows, which is what you want to do. But the trade-off is, man, there's a lot of pressure on you to do all of these things. So you're going to need some help. You are going to need some help. You're going to come to that realization one night when you pull your hair out to say, I can't do everything, to say that I'm going to need some help. So what do? You suddenly have to change, just like a butterfly, just like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. You're going to have to change. And so many people have that problem. That change is too complicated for so many people. Because as a small business grows, you're going to experience the difficulties of growth. And you're going to have to transition from being a thinker, doer, human resource, marketer, to a manager who manages the people that you hire to take care of those things for you. And a lot of entrepreneurs have a hard time with that. Hence, we have some problems with this idea of managing a business. Most entrepreneurs are not very good managers. So you need to kind of evolve or change from being an entrepreneur to a manager. And that's probably the most difficult task. It's like driving a standard, right? You got to go from first gear right up to fifth. And once you get used to it, Yeah, it's easy, but man, the first time you get behind the stick shift, you're probably going to stall the car out. So you require a different set of ideas. You got to get these different set of ideas. You got to become a planner. So a manager, your goal is to set goals for your business and to get the people that work for you to fulfill those goals. So you're kind of empowering others to do it for you. As a manager, you got to be an organizer. You got to be able to, for example, develop your organizational structure and say, this is how we're going to operate the business. That's probably not something you're used to as an entrepreneur. You're a staffer. Not only do you have to get people to work for you, you got to think about who's the right person, how much do I pay them, how do I manage them, how do I allow them to advance their careers, how do I replace them when they disappear? I might have to fire somebody. You know, that's the staffing issues that you got to worry about. You're going to have to be a leader. Lead by example. That's a bit of a challenge too, because all those people are looking to you for their paychecks, their livelihoods, everything else. That's challenging. And you're going to have to be a controller, because once it starts going, it's like being on a wild circus ride, right? How do you manage a busy week, not so busy week, not so busy week? How do you manage all your people in that? And that gets really challenging for a lot of entrepreneurs, because those are the skills that managers need that they're not necessarily the same skills that entrepreneurs have. So you need to develop these type of skills as an entrepreneur in order to be the skills we're talking about in this program, in order to really be successful. So here's the key takeaways from tonight. Here's what I want you to leave with. Businesses usually start off small with one person, few people, one or two. As the business grows, it's going to require more effort. It's like a seed, you got to put more water as it starts to grow. So that's going to create a workload for you as an entrepreneur. You're going to need to figure out how we manage the people that we hire in order to help you. So you need some level of organization to your organization, hence the name organization. You need it organized. That organizational structure that we spent a lot of time on tonight is a useful tool to help you do that, okay? Coming up with an organizational structure that makes sense and works for you is important, because it clarifies people's roles, responsibilities, what's expected, and it's clear to everybody. And there's lots of different ways to organize the business. So again, there's no pat answer to this is the way you need to do it. So it really depends on the situation. Entrepreneurs need to evolve. And we've seen that as business grows, these sorts of things need to come into play. Evolution is important. And management skills, the skills that we're talking about in this program, are so important in that evolutionary process in order to make it succeed. So that is the first module. That is that first component module. Those are the key takeaways. That's what I want to leave you with here tonight. I want you to now think about this second discussion as well, which is consider the management requirements discussed above. Develop a human resource plan. Now, this is not an intricate document. This is, who are the key people in your organization? So referring to your first discussion where you drew the organizational chart, you can just carry on with it and say, okay, who are the key people? What are their jobs? List their roles. So if you got 3 people, what do they do? Then you ask yourself, are all the potential roles covered off? Do these people handle it all? And how are you going to set it up to be able to allow that to be successful, to control, communicate them? So I want you to take the basic concept of the organizational structure that we looked at in the first discussion and now say, okay, let's rationalize why this person is in this role and what they're going to be doing. So those are the 2 that are covered there tonight. To it. So if you leave a message, that's great. and all kinds of stuff about me and what I do and some of the stuff I'm at is on my LinkedIn page. So I invite you to take a look at that.